Hello and welcome to Script and Pencils, the comic creator interview podcast from the Comic Crush. I'm your host, Paul, as always. It's the first one of these we've done in a while. I hope you guys are all out there and all doing okay. Got something very special for you today. I get to interview one of my favourite comic creators, someone whose work I've enjoyed for years. Her work on Plain Janes, Jim Rugg, was fantastic. Shade the Changing Woman with Marley Zarcone was amazing. Soupy Leaves Home, which is a terrific graphic novel from Dark Horse that you definitely should be tracking down. And now The Shift in Earth, which is what we're going to talk about today. Please say hello to Cecil Castellucci. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there.
So you're actually joining us live from France today, Cecil.
Yes.
Are you on vacation? Is it kind of a working holiday?
It's working. I mean, I teach in Denmark, so I was up there, and then I have this World War I novel that I'm sort of batting around. That is just sort of for pleasure for myself at this point. And so I went to Belgium, to Flanders, to Ypres to do some research. I'd done some research at the Somme this June. And now I'm in a art residency. I just sort of booked myself here for 10 days before I go over to England to go to Thought Bubble.
Mm. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the World War One novel, because in thinking about your work, Shade the Changing Woman, Soupy Leaves Home, set in the Depression era, Batgirl for DC, this new book, Shifting Earth, that we're here to talk about today. Your interests are incredibly diverse, and it amazingly kind of broad, and yet you kind of really managed to hone in on what makes an idea tick, really. And I've always loved your work for it. What made you pick the kind of ecological backbone for Shifting Earth as the subject for that book?
Yeah, so it was this is my pandemic baby. It was deep in the pandemic, and Karen Berger and I had been talking right before lockdown, and then like a week later we had lunch, and then a week later it was lockdown. And so we were kind of batting this idea around, and I had this idea about sort of a parallel Earth thing. And it was much more sort of speculative and stuff. And then lockdown happened, and the fires happened in LA, where like the air was terrible, and it just sort of looked like we were on Mars. And I was thinking a lot about food insecurity because just everybody was, and so I've talked about this before in other interviews, but I started scrapping seeds in my kitchen. So like I would make a tomato salad, and then I would save any seeds, and then I would plant them and grow a new tomato, to kind of like make sure that like I had some skill set to survive. My own little victory garden from my kitchen scraps. And so I just started thinking about all that kind of stuff, and I started attending a bunch of science lectures at lunchtime during the pandemic, and many of them were about the climate crisis. And so it just sort of became this sort of thing. And I think the parallel Earth thing was sort of this wish fulfillment to not be in the situation that we were all in. But I didn't want to write about the pandemic per se, but it was kind of a way to escape to a more seemingly idyllic place.
It's really fascinating to kind of think about it that way, because one always assumes the worst in sort of science fiction genre comic books, well, science fiction genre, anything really. There's always kind of got to be a dystopia, and unfortunately it does seem now that our reality has become the dystopia, and
Yeah.
it's a bizarre place to be in. It's such a strange and really quite horrible space to inhabit. Is that a lot of your own feelings about wanting to kind of escape? And
I mean, yeah,
is there an element of that?
without getting too into it, I mean, it's been hard,
Yeah.
not pandemic, but climate crisis, and certainly where I live, there was a time there where the people in power were what was happening, so and I'm sure, probably people in other countries feel like that with their own situations. And so, definitely felt like I wanted to escape, but also I think have, like I call, I think the book is kind of a hope punk book, because my desire for it was to not make a book that was so dystopic, so apocalyptic, that then you were like, well, what's the point, but more like, well, how do we take actions? How do we make small steps towards a better future? How can we envision positive, positive things, positive change? How do we open our own eyes to, what's going on? How do we have conversations? So that was sort of the hope of the book, to just sort of be maybe a conversation starter, or to sort of be couched in this place of hope.
I mean, it's interesting because I find that this is the first time in years where I've actually started to feel like, and I people always kind of chide me for this. I'm sure you do too. That's it. It's done. Like it's over, and it's now just going to be the slow managed end, basically. And it's like the first time I think it started in the pandemic for me. It was just like, oh yeah, this is it, isn't it? Like this is what the decline's going to be now. And I don't find a lot of hope there. But do you? Can you talk about some of the things and some of the ways that you are hopeful? Because I'm interested to get an opinion and hopefully kind of shake me out of that.
Yeah, exactly. Let me infect you with my hopefulness.
Please.
I mean, I think I am a little bit of a Pollyanna, like, even though, humans are going to human and we're colossally fucked up species. I think also we have a lot of beauty and grace and will and ingenuity. And I think that, like, one of the things that I always sort of take away with the climate crisis stuff, and with anything really, is that, yep, maybe you didn't do something yesterday, but you can do something today, and that's like the best day to start to do something to make things better down the line is today, so I feel like there's that. I also think that, like, science fiction has always had this sort of like power to help us to envision futures. And I think that if we start to try to envision futures where we've done things and that things are, sort of on some kind of road, then we, if we build it, we can make it, so I think, I mean, while I do think that, I mean, definitely we're in a different era now, and definitely things are coming to a head in many, many different ways. But, we're a pretty flexible species, that's our blessing and our curse, right? And so but I do think that I do think that there's a lot of hope, like when I see young people and how serious they take things and stuff like that. And I think that there's, we're in an era where science is fantastic.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of, as with all kind of great sort of disasters, there is a lot of advancement that will spring up out of that, and hopefully kind of lead us forward. Yeah, I'm just being bleak.
No, I know. I mean, I get it. I mean, I get it, and I feel like it's probably very frustrating for people of our generation, where it was like, it's not like we weren't paying attention to this. It's not like we weren't marching. It's not like we weren't crushing cans. It's like it was, but it was all out of our control because we were young people. And now we're the adults, and so we got to, like, make sure that we're doing the things and voting the way that is going to be, good and positive for young people. And we got to listen to them because it's their world.
I mean, this is the first time I remember being kind of genuinely sort of afraid about the next sort of decade or so, and I remember feeling that way sort of in the 80s because of the constant threat of the nuclear spectre and all that, but it was never quite this bad. But you seem to have a much better grip on it than I do.
I mean, it doesn't mean I don't have nightmares, but but I do, I think I just got to like move forward with hope. Cory Doctorow talks about how, like it just goes back to that thing of imagining better futures, like what if instead what if instead of like, being on your porch with a gun, what if you went over to your neighbors with a cake, and I think we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, right? Like people being helpful towards neighbors and stuff. And so I look to that.
That's good. I think that's great. I think that is actually the way, I'm not really good at practicing it myself. I'm far too far too isolated. No, you're actually right. It is the way. You're working with Flavia Biondi. Sorry, I'll get that out. Flavia Biondi on this. She's kind of one of my favorite sort of, at least emerging to me, although I'm sure tons of people know her work. And I love the stuff she's done with Burger Books so far.
Ruby Falls,
yeah, a terrific book, and I think Anna Nocenti really kind of did a great job on the scripting of that, and such a terrific book. How did you find the experience of working with her on this?
I mean, it was great. I mean, I think what Flavia is so amazing at is these, like the drama that she has between the characters, the intimate moments, like, because Shifting Earth is a really big book. It's a big world book, and I mean, I could have written it for like 300 pages instead of just, 93 or whatever. But, and I think that, the reason why it works, or I think it works, is because Flavia really, makes sure that we're really with Maeve and Ben and Zuzi, and Jodhpur, like, we're with those characters in such an intimate fashion that we sort of see the consequences of their world's actions on them, and how they're trying to save their worlds in ways that are good, and also ways where maybe there are mistakes being made, but I think that intimate drama is what Flavia is so good at. She was a delight to work with, and I just want to shout out to Fabiana Mascolo as well for the colors, because I mean the colors are just really fantastic and like really sort of show you the difference between the two worlds.
Yeah, it's a terrific looking book, and I'm always really taken with Flavia's work, and I'm much more. And this is no shade on writers at all, but I find myself as I've gotten older, I'm much more art led. Like I'm much more kind of the moment I pick up a book, it's just like, okay, if it looks good, I don't really need to check out the writer. And that's no disrespect to the writer, because going that way, you usually find great writers as well.
Well, I think the hope is that the artist likes your writing, and then they're excited to do something so fabulous, So I think Flavia liked the book. I know she did.
You certainly get that sense. You certainly get that sense. So the book kind of tells dual narratives that begin to kind of merge. And was at what point in the kind of, I guess what I'd call the eureka stages, when the ideas are coming, at what point did you kind of go, okay, actually this has to be two narratives? Was that early on, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of tricky because, I knew that I wanted it to be parallel narratives between these two main characters of Maeve and Zuzi, who are both scientists on their respective worlds, right? But, one thing that was difficult was that at some point you have to pick one to kind of follow, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. And I felt like telling the story from Maeve's point of view in a near future Earth that we live on was a lot more sort of understandable would be easier for the reader to be able to like get into the story, because we know the shorthand of our own world. And so we could have that kind of like, I don't know, Wizard of Oz moment where we're like, oh, we're not in Kansas anymore, we're in a different, in a different place. So I feel kind of sad, because I wish that I could have spent a little more time with Zuzi, on her planet, on her Earth, and dig in a little bit more into, sort of the sort of world building over there. Um, but it just seemed like, for the purposes of this story, unless you're doing it in like maybe a longer thing where it's like each issue could have been like a different, you know what I mean? Like, and then you bring it together and you really have like sort of both points of view. Maybe I'll do that for another story somewhere down the line. But the way that Karen and I had sort of like talked about setting up this book as like a graphic novel, I still made it into chapters, but it felt more obvious to just sort of stick with Maeve mostly, even though there's that parallel thing. And I think that the little text stuff helps with that.
Yeah. And that stuff is really kind of poetic and beautiful, and I really enjoyed that element of it. And it kind of helps you take a moment and take a beat to simulate what you've kind of been reading and what you're about to read, which I really liked. Is in terms of the sort of sci-fi elements of it. I mean, I loved the, as you say, the "we're not in Kansas anymore" moment that Maeve has, and I liked how kind of subtly that was done, rather than being a huge vista, which I guess might have been a temptation for the artist to do a kind of look out the window and it's some huge different place. Is actually done quite small in the interior, and I really liked that. You talked about reading stuff by Cory Doctorow and attending sort of science lectures during the pandemic. How much of that informed a lot of this other world or other Earth that you wrote about?
I mean, I'll say I'm always inspired by Corey, but like I pale in comparison to his masterful genius. But he always talks about sort of economics of things, and so he's a dear friend, and so I think I tried to think of the world and like what their economics were that were different than the way that we sort of organize our planet, and the idea of sort of like your use is your credit, and it's not like sort of money, it's like what do you contribute to this sort of struggling society, because they have whatever, it's you see it soon, but 2 moons, so they have a lot of water instead of a lot of land mass, and so they have had to organize themselves differently than we do. The science lectures, I mean, I did speak to an astrophysicist about wormholes. They were like, this is not possible, but here's some hand that you can say. But I was really inspired about an event that happened called the Carrington event, which happened in the 1800s, where the sunspots were so big on the sun and they were facing the earth, and there was a huge mass coronal ejection, and it like telegraph wires got set on fire, and like and if that were to happen now, it would cause major problems. So I kind of like sort of hand waved with that, and sort of some other things. And then I did speak to a botanist as well about rewilding, and like what how what that's all about, and what kind of seeds we would have, and then sort of looked at like what the world would look like, what Earth would look like if it had 2 moon, like a big moon and a little moon that were at the same distance, and like there's all these like sort of theories about like so that just sort of made me think about how they might be more sustainable in terms of like wind, water, sun, and that they might evolve their sort of technologies differently than we would. And so it just kind of all I'm a science enthusiast. You know, my parents are scientists, so I just get kind of inspired by everything, and then I try to talk to people about it.
It's kind of a constant frustration to me, and I'm not saying I'm smart enough to know how to do any of this. So, but it's a constant frustration to me that we live on a planet that literally provides us everything we need to power the planet and to survive, to eat, to drink. But we don't, you know, we're only using a fraction of it. You know, we're not, there aren't, you know, a ton of wind, or there aren't enough wind farms. There aren't enough solar panels or so.
Or wave energy.
Yeah. And it's shocking to me.
Well, we're going to get there. Otherwise,
we're going to have to.
Exactly.
But it is shocking to me that we didn't evolve that way. And I don't know if I'm sure they have managed to pinpoint what the turning point was as to why.
I mean, I can tell you that in my research, one thing that I found was that, like, you know, when the cars were made, there were 2 cars that were made, right? There were some, you know, cars that used fuel, and then there were cars that used electricity, right? And what ended up happening was one of the things, it's a very small thing, but like, this is one of those weird turning points in history. Was one of the things was that women liked the electric cars because they were quiet, but men didn't like the electric cars because they were quiet. And, you know, so men won because we live in a patriarchy, because they could hear it when the engine turned on. And it's so basic and stupid that you're like, oh yeah, that tracks. Like, that totally tracks.
It's an entirely stupid decision.
Yeah. You know, and I think that there were these small turning points where, you know, it was just sort of like, this could have been the technology that, you know, we could have had more, you know, there were solar panels, there were electric cars back at the, you know, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And we just chose not to go that way, you know, whether for profit or noise or, you know, whatever it was, you know, but for a simple twist of fate.
In your own life, do you find it easy to be green, or is it something you find quite difficult? I mean, obviously I'm not putting it on you. Well, what are you doing, you know?
Well, that's okay. You should ask me. I mean, you know, I think I definitely became a little bit more conscious about my food waste during the pandemic, because I was home and, you know, cooking all the time and stuff. So, you know, I do compost. I eat everything out of my fridge. I try to only buy what I need. I have I have a garden in Los Angeles. It's drought resistant plants, you know, so it's like a lot of succulents, and like I've also planted friendly things that don't take up a lot of water, that are nice for bees and butterflies, so that they can come to my garden if they would like to. So I do that. And I tried, like the reason why I'm over here overseas for like 2 months is because I try to, if I'm going to travel somewhere big, then I try to like go for a long period of time and then take trains everywhere, you know? So it's like, I try to minimize, you know, I try to reframe the way that I'm doing my travel to be able to be still have my fun, but, you know, be a little bit more conscious about my, you know, my impact and stuff. And, you know, like, I lost all my clothing, and, you know, I'm going to go buy vintage clothing. I'm not going to go buy new clothing, you know, like, so, you know, it's just little things like that. Girl swaps, in terms of like clothing swaps, you know, where we like, you know, all my gal pals or whoever wants to come over will come over, and we'll, you know, empty out our closets and exchange clothes. So those are the kinds of things that I've been doing. And I've been recycling. I started the in my dorm room, you know, in my dorm in college, you know, I started the recycling program, you know, so I've been trying.
I remember when we were kids, when I was younger, we used to actually, before they started recycling locally, you had to kind of march all your stuff down to the local sort of shopping center, and having to do that. We'd
crush the cans and then put them in bags and then bring them. Yep. I that's, you know, So that's what, those are the things that I'm trying to do. Be more conscious about water, especially because I live in like such a drought prone area. I mean, Los Angeles is in such a huge drought. So, and what about you? What are you doing?
Well, like the good thing about, the good and bad thing about London is it's all run as separate boroughs. So everywhere is something different, and we're lucky in our borough that they've always encouraged recycling for as long as I can remember, and they just started doing food composting. So we have a bin,
as well.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah, because it makes such a difference.
Yeah, I mean, the only hope is that it is all actually going to the places where they, and not to a rubbish tip in Romania, which is kind of a lot of what seems to happen with recycling and stuff in the UK, unfortunately. But you have to cross your fingers and hope that's the case, and then I guess try and put pressure on people that can affect that change, if that's not the case. But I like the idea of low waste. I mean, we did look at sustainability, because there were a few kind of sustainable stores that have opened up in terms of, you bring your container, you get your spices or whatever, or seeds, but I think I had a friend who did this for a year, and she said, you know what, it just got incredibly difficult carrying 20 jars in a bag somewhere and then carrying them back once they were full, and that. So but I think there needs to be a more localized version of that. But again, it's
bring back the milk person or something, where it's because I mean, the problem is it's well, then you need a car, right? If you had a car, then it wouldn't be a drag to carry all those jars, but then you have a car, and then that's a problem, right? So
no, it's like, and I do remember things like, Bill Gates saying, look, it's great that everyone wants to put solar panels on their houses now, but he said it's kind of pointless. What you actually really need to be doing is huge solar arrays out in deserts and other places, and they need to be powering the whole thing.
I think there's something about sort of because I think we feel a little bit helpless. I feel like the fact that people want to do something like that is at least a step in the right direction, because they're thinking
totally
about it.
Completely.
And then it's maybe then the next step is the big solar arrays that we really need, or the wave machines, or whatever. But I think it's good that people are actually, it's even on their radar now, to think about
that. And it is just frustrating, I guess, and part laziness on my part for not wanting to kind of investigate and find out how it can be done. It's like, look, if it rains so much in England, why can't I power the house with water? Why isn't there an adaptable thing where I can drive the house with water? Or it's there is something like that. But of course, I say that, and I'm not the one out there kind of having to come up with that. So.
And I think it's all coming. It's just we're not there yet,
Yeah, and it kind of worries me that it's not going to be fast enough, and
no,
we're not going to.
Of course not. But I mean, but like I said, it's like I think it's just, what are we doing today? That's all we can do.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and I love that you can come up with a more positive outlook on that, and I could just carry on being grumpy.
And I think I think in Shifting Earth. Is that it is, Maeve and Susie have to make some pretty big decisions about their world and how they can be helpful. And that solution about how they can be helpful to their respective worlds looks a lot different than what you think it might be.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the comic, was it a long period between idea? Because I'm always fascinated because comics always seem like quite a fast medium in terms of, I think of an idea and then I can get this down on paper, and then someone else can come in and they can do their bit. Was it a long period between the moment the idea popped into your head? Do you remember what you were doing when the idea popped into your head?
I mean, the idea was slightly different.
Right.
it had a parallel world thing. That was what me and Karen talked about at lunch. But then a week later, lockdown happened. And then it was different. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So, but like the idea, I mean, it was just me really being interested in this sort of dual narrative and like this idea of like two earths. Like I just love a parallel earth story, you know, where, you know, there's like other, you know, like where it's familiar but not familiar, you know, like you could, you know, you could look at like The Man in the High Castle or oh, what's that great show with J.K. Simmons, that guy.
Oh,
You know what I'm
Counterpart.
talking about. Pardon?
Counterpart, is it?
Counterpoint. Yeah. Yeah. So good. And then like Fringe and like, you know, just like all these great kind of stories like that. Um, but I wanted to do something a little bit different, you know, where it wasn't like everything was exactly the same and like every single person that you met there was an exact counterpoint to your earth, you know what I mean? But they were just slightly different. I wanted it to be sort of reflective of like, well, what if only, you know, a quarter of the people that you knew kind of maybe came back, you know, and not everybody, you know, it's not everybody. It's like, you know, and they're not in the same kind of job or uh they're not in a familiar enough world for you to, you know, sort of like have them play a slightly different alternative role in that other earth.
Mm. And of course, what parallel Earths do represent quite wonderfully is the beauty of the second chance, right? The
Absolutely,
chance
yeah,
to do it over.
yeah, which is definitely a
And
part of this book, you know.
yeah, yeah, and I think everybody wants that. We don't all get it, but everybody wants that. Everyone wants that opportunity,
Yeah,
and I think they're great for kind of accessing that and getting that kind of emotion
yeah,
through.
and also conversation started, you know, and
Mm,
I think especially like when you think about history, you know, it's like I'm trying to do this World War One book, and you know, you just think about it and you think about like how nobody thought that the war was going to happen. Nobody thought that, like, you know, whatever. And it's like, but for a simple twist of fate, all of these things, like, you know, sort of,
mm,
you know, went into a thing. And I think that's the kind of fun exercise, is the conversations that you can have coming out of it. And I certainly think about, you know, what are the conversations going to be about climate crisis in 100 years from now, when people in their caves or whatever are going to be having that conversation, um, or you know, or what their conversations are going to be about the pandemic and about how we handled this tumultuous moment in world
mm.
history. You know, I think that's really interesting, and I think that the conversations that can come out of alternative histories or parallel earths um, help us to kind of like sort of understand where we are and sort of context of history and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm. And I think it's just a fascinating book, and I really do have to kind of applaud you and Flavia and the whole team on it. It's a terrific book, and that is available now at all good comic shops. Definitely available at Gosh, where you'll also find me working occasionally, and you can come there and take a look at that. It's from Dark Horse Burger Books. How was the experience of working with Karen?
Oh, it was a delight. I mean, Karen is just such an icon, and you know, I kind of feel like you know, even though I was with Minx and with Shelley Bond,
Mm,
um and that Shelley was my editor with Plain Jane's on the Minx line. Minx was like a baby of Vertigo, you know, it was a baby
yeah.
imprint on Vertigo. And whenever I would go into New York, Karen would always like, you call me into her office as well, and we would have conversations about comics and making comics. And you know, I think she kind of proudly considers me part of her last class of creators,
Mm,
you know, which include like Willow Wilson and Josh Dysart and you know, a couple of other people, and so I feel very honored to be in that sort of last class. And so we always sort of assumed that at some point we would do something together, and I was glad that it came during this time. And she's such a great editor, just really smart, and I looked forward to her red pen, because I just learned so much.
I think Karen is certainly someone who can spot talent.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
think
Yay!
yeah,
That's me.
definitely. Yeah, absolutely. But definitely someone who knows where the talent is and where the talent's coming from. And I love the fact that in doing Burger Books, she's kind of almost gone back to the kind of Vertigo, and the Genties. You're there. There's all these great names you see on these books that I remember from books back in the 80s and 90s, and it's great to see that sort of pool of talent again, plus new talents coming through, like Flavia. That's always terrific. Talking about your other comics work, I mean, obviously I first became aware of you through Shade the Changing Woman, and then went back and read Plain Jane's, and was absolutely thrilled by Soupy Leaves Home.
Thanks.
Which I loved. That was a terrific book.
And Female Furies too, right? Female Furies.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I almost forgot about Female Furies.
That was a good one too.
It was. Yeah. I almost forgot. Sorry. It's because I don't have that sort of memory that allows me to kind of wrap off like I used to. What people did.
No, but it's funny because when you were first listing some of my books and you were like, oh, she jumps around. I was like, oh, they're all about trauma, including Female Furies. I was like, you're right. I wrote the same book over and over again.
I think one of the things that I've always found engaging about your work is you have a fantastic way with metaphor. And I kind of, which I know is a bit like, oh, well, you can say that about any rock, but it's that there is a way of doing it. And I mean, going back to, Plain Jane's with the art versus terrorism and the kind of flash mob nature of what the artists are doing versus the terrorist attack that kind of kicks it off. And that was fascinating to me. And I think in Shade the Changing Woman, where you took ideas from Milligan stuff, from Ditko stuff, and found metaphorical resonance for those in your work. I thought that was fantastic.
It was interesting because with like Shade, I definitely felt like Milligan had really sort of captured the landscape of darkness, of human darkness. Shade the Changing Man is such a it's brilliant, but it's very dark. It's very brutal. It's very, whatever. And so I was like, okay, well, how can I make it so that me and Marley can carve our own place for Shade, so that they can coexist. And so I decided to sort of use the landscape of the heart, is sort of like what I decided, to kind of do. And I thought that it was important for Shade that if you never read Ditko or Milligan, you would be able to like read the book on its own. But if you had read Ditko or Milligan, you'd be like, oh, I see what she's done here. And actually I did the same with Female Furies as well. Like it's very much based on, I'm going to misremember. It's either Mr. Miracle number 8 or 9 from Kirby's run. And I basically took the story, which is like the Himone issue, and like, which has like this character named Aurelie, who is, Protectorate Willick is like obsessed with her. And it's the origin story of how Big Barda and Scott Free meet each other. It's their meet cute moment. And it is the inciting incident for Barda sort of going on her new adventure. And I just took that exact issue and I said, what if I exploded it out and told the story of Aurelie and what happened, So I feel like if you really knew Mr. Miracle, the Kirby run, and you could see exactly what I did. And that's why in the collection, I was so glad that in the collected edition, that DC Comics put that issue in the back of the book.
Oh, nice.
So you can actually see, what I did with Adriana Mello.
Because that I only read in singles, I'm afraid. I haven't got it collected yet.
So in the collected edition, I asked and they said okay to have that issue. I think it's issue number 8 of Mr. Miracle.
I'll try and check it out. It's been a
Yeah.
long time since I've picked it up and read it, and I enjoyed some of your Batgirl stuff. That was terrific as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
which was also super hard too, because it's like, it's like like when they're like, oh, by the way, the Joker is going to come over to Barbara Gordon's house and knock on her door. I was like, what? Like, that seems very loaded, and so I'm really, really proud of what me and Robbie Rodriguez did with that. I think it's issue 47 of my Batgirl run, where we tried to have it be a sort of call and response to Killing Joke.
Right.
So proud of that.
Yeah, it's always a difficult one with Killing Joke, but I think it's more difficult for the stuff that there's been added onto it in commentary afterwards for me, because at the time I read it, I never saw it in the way that seems to have now been kind of interpreted.
I think the hard thing as one of the many people who has gotten to write Batgirl sort of steadily for a little while, I think one of the difficult things is that everybody always wants to sort of bring back not the people who are writing Batgirl, but like everybody else around it wants to bring back Barbara's torture from the Joker. And I just sort of felt like it was important to have an issue where she's confronting the Joker and she's ready. She's like, he doesn't have any power over me. It doesn't mean that I'm not traumatized. Doesn't mean that I'm over this. Doesn't mean that whatever, but I have done my therapy. I've done my work. I am I am ready to meet this moment, because it doesn't, that I can have agency over myself. So,
and is it nice working on fan favorite characters like Barbara Gordon? I mean, is that a thrill, or is it daunting? I mean, what kind of goes through your mind when that happens?
It's both of those things, right? I mean, it's completely a thrill, because Batgirl is just Barbara is an amazing character. I've long said that what I love most about her is that she really is the most resilient bat. She's very flexible. She knows how to sort of do self-care and try to, sort of be very resilient. And she doesn't she's always like, how can I be a hero no matter what circumstances I'm in, no matter what's thrown at me, how can I be a hero? And she never lets go of that. And I think that's such an amazing thing. But it's also frightening, because, people have their opinions, and, as we know, comics people can have very big opinions and stuff.
It's very I find it a bit extreme.
Yeah. So that's kind of, and then also it's like, you don't want to disappoint yourself. The fan that's inside of you, so sometimes I almost think that it's maybe I didn't really know very much about Shade when I did Shade the Changing Girl, right? So I didn't have that kind of attachment that I do to Batgirl or, let's say, Princess Leia, or whatever. And so so you're kind of able to not let go of things a little bit, but with Batgirl you're like, oh, but it is thrilling.
Do you ever see yourself going back to Shade? Do you feel that story's done, or is that something you and Marley could go? I really miss Marley's work as well. I actually really miss seeing Marley's work out there regularly. I know she's got a lot of other stuff kind of going on in her life and things, but I adored her work on that book.
We'll bring the band back together at some point, me and Marley, I'm sure. I don't know. I don't know if you remember how Shade ends, but Shade.
It's been a while, yeah. So.
Okay, so Shade. I'm spoiling it for anybody who's. So if you haven't read it, and you should read it
at this point in the interview.
So Shade. It's changes into River, right? Something happens with Shade, and her best friend, this guy River, who's a young black man, young bisexual black man, he is now Shade. And so me and Marley always felt like that's where our story ended, and our dream was that the baton would be passed to a creator that would do River as Shade justice. So I don't know that I would ever go back to Shade where I left it off.
Right.
But I could go back to Shade before I left it off. But I also kind of feel like we told that story, you know?
Yeah. And fantastically so. So, you know, but yeah, I certainly hope to see more from you and Marley working together, because I feel
I'm
that was
sure
kind of something of a dream team for me.
Yeah.
And you know, I always read through, if I can find some of Marley's sort of older work. Sometimes I find little bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah, I've been very lucky with the artists that I've worked with. Shout out to all the artists that I've worked with.
Yeah, all terrific. And I think you again, like Karen, you have a nose for talent. You have a nose for for working with really terrific.
Some of it has been just pure luck, you know, like, you know, I mean, Marley, it was Shelley who was just like, oh, I know exactly who should draw this. And then me and Marley met, and it was like love at first sight. It was like, oh, we've been best friends forever, even though we just met 2 minutes ago, you know? So.
Oh, amazing.
And Jim Rugg as well. That was Shelley.
Oh, Jim, yeah.
Jim is just the best in the world. Nate Powell, I've worked with. He's incredible. You know, Flavia, I would work with again in a heartbeat. Yeah, just everyone. I love you guys.
What you really want to do is get Flavia and Marley on a book together, I think.
Yeah,
that's how you can do your alternating worlds.
Yeah.
In terms of what's next, you're talking about this World War II. Is that going to be a novel or World War I?
Okay.
Is that going to be a novel or a graphic novel?
Yeah, it'll be a novel. I mean, I don't know. It's just something that I'm doing sort of it's my passion project. I mean, hopefully somebody will want it. But yeah, it's going to be a novel, a straight historical fiction novel, except that there will be some slight comic elements in it. You know, so it's not going to be like a full hybrid like I did with You're the Beast with Nate Powell, where it was alternating chapters of prose and graphic novel. This will be sort of more like some silent pages, some 2-page silent comics, and maybe some portraits. But mostly it'll just be like a prose novel.
Oh, I certainly look forward to that. That sounds terrific. And is that sort of very much the next thing, or is that something you're kind of working on between other projects? Anything you can talk about?
Other projects. Yeah, I have a graphic novel that I just handed in the script to. That's going to be illustrated. That's in collaboration with Shazleen Khan, who's a young British artist, and it's called My First Monster, and that's going to be on Little Brown. It's a YA graphic novel. And then I'm doing a Miss Fisher's Modern Mysteries, which is it was a TV show, you know, Australian cozy mystery lady detective, and I'm doing a prequel graphic novel. So Phryne Fisher at age 17 during World War I. So it kind of nicely fits into sort of the research that I've been doing for my thing. That, you know, is like, oh, great, I can use this in some way. And then I'm on Star Wars Hyperspace on Dark Horse with Amanda Diebert and Michael Morrissey, where we each have like 4 issues in different eras of Star Wars. And so that's amazing. Been really fun. Yeah. I just did Luke and Leia just came out. I think Finn and Poe comes out this month. Could be out right now. I don't know. And then
are we getting those in the UK? I'm not sure if we're like it's so weird with the licensing in Star Wars, where like because we weren't getting the IDW sort of kids Star Wars over here.
Interesting.
Although I'd be surprised if we didn't get the Dark Horse stuff. So it's interesting to see how much. I mean, you're quite the Star Wars fan, right? Because you've done quite a few novels and things. And
I wrote 1 novel, yeah.
And I think you've done more. I'm sorry.
Lived in a tent for 6 weeks waiting for Star Wars Episode 1 tickets. So, you know, I like the Star Wars.
Yes. So I remember this now from the very first interview we did for Shade the Changing Girl #1. And I was shocked that Cecil had spent.
Yep. 6 weeks in a tent. Yep. So, it's kind of funny when like some people are like, well, what are your Star Wars creds? It's like, I don't know. I might not know the name of every ship, but I lived on the street.
I don't, you know. I think you shouldn't have to prove it, really. I think you can like one element of a thing and call yourself a fan of that thing, and that's fine. Or you can like all the elements. I find it a bit scary, the people that like all the elements,
Well, it's very, I mean, kudos to them, but it's also, it's very comprehensive, and it doesn't mean that I don't like it as much as you do. You know what I mean? Like it, and I'm not just talking about Star Wars, I'm talking about everything. And you can also just like one little corner of something and not like the new corners of it. And that's okay. It's okay.
Are you kind of watching? Do you keep up with that stuff now? Are you watching all the shows on Disney Plus? Is that your type of thing, or are you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I might not like watch it like I'm not watching Andor right now because I'm traveling. Right. So I'm like, I'll just wait until it's, whatever. But definitely just watched She-Hulk, while I've been traveling, and found that to be completely charming,
Yeah, I loved it.
And especially as a lady creator, I was like, oh, I get this. Like I get what they're doing here, and I really appreciated that. But yeah, for sure, I'll watch everything eventually.
Yeah. Well, we all hope for that, right?
Yeah.
I'm sort of building up to retirement, so I can finally watch and read all the things that have been building up around me.
The nice thing too is like, even with like comics and stuff, like I'm, a lot of times it's like, I'm not reading as many books, prose or comics as I'd like to, because like, what am I reading right now? I'm reading a bunch of World War I books, or I feel too bloated with words sometimes to be able to read more words, so it's like, or sometimes it's like, I just don't want to be like influenced by something. So it's like, I'm not, but the great thing about books is, and TV shows or movies, they're always there for you to discover, like whenever you're ready, like they're there for you, so.
It's great. Cecil, I certainly hope people will continue discovering your comics and your books. I really love your work, and I love every chance I get to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your travels and your work to talk to us today. Shifting Earth is available now. It's on Burger Books, which is on Dark Horse Comics. So it should be available at comic shops everywhere. You can get it at Gosh Comics, or if you're in the US, you can pick it up over there, I'm sure, quite readily. Definitely worth reading. As with all Cecil stuff, do track down Shade the Changing Woman and Shade Changing Girl and Shade Changing Woman, and then correct. and of course, Soupy Luso is like, I definitely think that's something that more people should be reading, because that's a terrific
I love that
piece
book
of work.
So much. Yeah.
Terrific piece of work.
Thank you.
And a really fascinating view of a period of history that I knew about but didn't really know about.
Hobos, man. They're very interesting.
And funny enough, there were two works that came out that were sort of the Depression era, about Depression era hobos, and one was very fantastical, and I can't remember what it is now.
Was that Rock Candy Mountain? Is that the one?
Yes, that was the one.
Yeah.
And
very different.
It's radically different. Both excellent, and both talk about the kind of secret hobo language, and they were both kind of fascinating. And I remember reading them both at the same time, so I got a kind of educational info drop of great stuff. But definitely both worth reading them, and of course, Cecil's work is definitely worth tracking down. Thank you so much for talking to us, Cecil.
Thank you.
Guys, I actually don't know when the next podcast is going to be. There is another interview scheduled, which I can't talk about just yet, because we've just sort of fine-tuning the details on that. You will notice at the moment we are not podcasting as much as we used to be. The podcast and the way we do them are changing. I will have more answers for you on that soon, but sorry, bear with me while I kind of navigate through it. but by next year we should be sort of back up and running. Thanks for watching. Cecil, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time on The Crush.